We love to see where you're from, so if you could just say hello in the chat screen, kind of it gives us that feeling of connection because we're just now starting to be able to get back in the world. We're continuing to do these webinars for the time being, but at some point we might shift things up. Hello everyone, yes, I see you logging in. So today we have with us Jeff Mishlove. And he had a PBS show that he co-produced way back in 1986, all the way through 2002, called Thinking Aloud. And at some point after that show ended, he started his own series with the same name, New Thinking Aloud Foundation. And I love the tagline, Conversations on the Leading Edge of Knowledge and Discovery. And certainly Jeff Mishlove is on that leading edge because he, back in 1980, got a doctorate, his PhD in parapsychology at the University of California, Berkeley. And we were just determining that he may be the only doctoral diploma in parapsychology in the whole world. We're not sure, but definitely of everyone he knows. So that's pretty unique. Now, we met Jeff when we were on his program, New Thinking Aloud, and at that time he was recording everything in his home studio in Albuquerque. So we were there in 2018, and we noticed when looking at Jeff's more recent interviews, many of them are people that we've had on this program. So I think we'll find a lot of common ground. And we'll post some links, but Jeff was the author of The PK Man and Roots of Consciousness, way back, a while back. So yeah, well, one of them, Roots of Consciousness, 1997.
Right.
And
PK Man, more recent.
More recent. Okay, PK means psychokinesis. What is it? Psychokinesis. Yeah.
Psychokinesis.
I thought I was saying it wrong. Welcome, Jeff.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, Jeff, this is really a treat for us. I must confess, I've been binge watching your YouTube channel, New Thinking Aloud, for the last few days, and absolutely loving it. It's amazing the education someone can get just by paying attention to your interviews. Just an extraordinary job you've done to spread this to the world. And where I'd like to start would be to go back to kind of earlier in your life and how in the world you got into this back in those early days when the rest of the world was, not really thinking in these terms.
Well, if we go back, let us say to 1972, I was at that time a graduate student at Berkeley in criminology. I was doing field work at San Quentin Prison in the psychiatric unit there. I had a background in psychology. So I was doing group therapy with murderers and rapists. And it dawned on me, and actually it dawned on me because I had a very powerful dream, a dream in which a great uncle of mine appeared. And it was so powerful that when I woke up from this dream, I was in tears. And I was singing at the same time. I was singing like this very sacred song from the Jewish liturgy of the high holidays and crying. And so I wrote home to my parents and said, how's Uncle Harry? Hadn't thought about him or heard from him in maybe 10 years. And my mother called me right away. She said, how did you know? Uncle Harry just died.
Wow.
Amazing. Yeah. What an introduction.
Yeah, so that made me realize that as much as I was enjoying criminology and the study of human deviance, basically, that I wanted to make the switch from negative forms of deviance, crime, and psychopathology to positive forms of deviance, which involved, for the way I saw it, mysticism, creativity, intuition, and psychic functioning. Wow. But there were no opportunities. And I struggled with this for months and months. At Berkeley, you could study crime and psychopathology in many different departments, but They just had no programs looking at the higher ranges of human consciousness. And one day, after many months of agonizing about this, I knew that I was going to have a dream, and the answer to my quest was going to come in a dream. I just had certainty. And that night, I had this dream. And when I awakened from the dream, I thought, wow, this is it. I have it. But I didn't know what it meant. The dream was that I was visiting some friends in an apartment in Berkeley, students that I knew in married student housing. And I knocked on the door of their apartment. Nobody was home. And in the dream, I found the key, let myself in, walked into their living room. On the middle of the living room floor, I found a magazine. In the dream, it was named EYE. And that's when I woke up from the dream, feeling like, here's the answer. So I actually put on my tennis shoes, ran across town like 5 miles to this apartment, knocked on the door. Nobody was home, just as I had dreamt. And in fact, I knew they kept a key under the doormat. So I found the key, let myself in, walked into their living room. There in the middle of the living room floor was a magazine. And it was, here's an example of a dream distortion. The name of the magazine was Focus.
Interesting.
And this magazine brought focus into my life. For any of your viewers who are familiar with the San Francisco Bay Area, Focus is the magazine of listener-sponsored radio and television, KQED. And I'm paging through the magazine, and it dawned on me for the very first time in my life, I could pursue my interests by getting involved in nonprofit media, which was a huge shift for me because I didn't own a radio or a TV. And in those days, unlike today, I was a long-haired hippie, and I didn't believe in radio or TV. I thought that electronic communication was all phony baloney. But I changed my mind. I went and I volunteered at KPFA Radio, which is nonprofit Pacifica Radio in Berkeley. I had, by that time, earned my master's degree in criminology, and they said to me, well, here we have a job for you. Sit at this desk, and when you hear the doorbell ring, push this button and let people in the front door. And I gladly took the job as a volunteer. Within 3 weeks, I had learned how to produce radio programs, and I produced a program about local psychics in Berkeley, like you don't have to be from out of town to be psychic. And the program director liked it so much, they gave me a regular slot. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I found myself hosting an interview show called The Mind's Ear with world-class experts, such as yourself, who are doing book tours, and they come through the San Francisco Bay Area, and they appeared on my radio show. So that gave me the confidence to go back to the university and to take advantage of the interdisciplinary doctoral program when, if you're already a graduate student in good standing and you want to do a doctoral program that no department will sponsor, but you can find 3 faculty members in different departments who will sponsor you, you can then create a doctoral program, a unique individual doctoral program. So I took advantage of that. I was in the program for 7 years. After I got my diploma in parapsychology, they shut the whole program down.
Oh, no. Only at Berkeley, right? Could you have done that?
Well, they have subsequently reopened it after several decades. I guess they felt it was safe again.
That is hilarious.
But so ever since basically 1973, I've been doing interviews in the media like this and studying parapsychology.
So, why don't you share with us what is parapsychology? I mean, we know it in general, but our listeners might not really know the very wide range of topics that really covers. Can you do that in a short fashion? I'm sure it could take a really long time if you went in detail.
Well, in a nutshell, parapsychology is the scientific study of extrasensory perception, ESP, which includes telepathy, retrocognition, precognition, clairvoyance, and psychokinesis, or mind over matter, which includes healing, for example, or metal bending, or in the spiritualistic world, materializations and apports, things of that sort. It doesn't formally include the study of life after death. That really belongs primarily to an earlier discipline out of which parapsychology emerged, which was called psychical research and still is called psychical research. So those two disciplines really go together.
And the psychical research, are you talking about the Society for Psychical Research that does all the mediumship research?
Exactly.
Yes, okay. Out of England. I didn't know that parapsychology stemmed from that. Wow.
Well, yes. And in fact, J.B. Rhine is considered the founder of American parapsychology. He worked in the 1930s at Duke University, and he came up with the idea that, which was pretty popular, that whatever evidence you were to come up with to support survival after death could also be explained as extrasensory perception or psychokinesis by living people. So why not just study that? And he also felt you can then use statistical methods and the experimental design, double blinds and the like, and put the whole field on more scientific footing. So in the 1930s, the emphasis shifted away from life after death. But I would say these days, especially because of your work and the work of other people, that topic is now coming to the forefront once again.
It sure is.
I
Yeah.
think it's clear that the study of those particular aspects, there's really a lot of overlap, and to have any kind of understanding of apparent communications from the beyond, after death communications, psychic mediumship, etc. You've got to have a pretty big view of what consciousness is, and that it's not created by the brain, it's not local, but is a much kind of grander process of integration and assimilation. Do you think that you've seen in your career that we've progressed some along these lines of bringing this together and coming to a deeper understanding?
William James, who is one of my heroes, the founder of American psychology and also a psychical researcher himself, once said that we can't expect progress in this field decade by decade as in other fields. We really have to look by the half century and the century. And I think if you take the long-term view like that, yes, you can see that we're making progress. It's very slow, but if I look back over the last 150 years, you can see incremental progress. And if you project forward, I expect it'll be another 150, 200 years before we really have a solid handle on all of this, because amongst other things, it's mixed in with psychopathology. It's mixed in with higher states of consciousness that aren't even recognized very much by the mainstream academic and research communities.
Right. And in discussing those kind of higher states of consciousness, I mean, some of them involve, using substances. Some are just kind of spontaneous epiphanies. In your series of interviews, what would you say have been the most kind of revealing about the kind of deep nature of that mystery of the nature of reality and of the fundamental aspects of consciousness?
What I think, Eben, is that we are on the cusp of a new era of research. And it involves people like yourself, people who have had near-death experiences and are studying them systematically, but also people who are advanced yoga practitioners, advanced meditators, advanced lucid dreamers. You mentioned the use of entheogens or psychedelics. There are disciplined people in those areas. And I call all of these people psychonauts. And I think that we're at a point in history where we can combine the inputs from all of these different approaches, and we can combine them with new mathematical understandings of things like hyperspace. Because as far as I'm concerned, if the afterlife exists, and I think I've had a taste of it, it exists somewhere, and it's not in three-dimensional space. Where else could it be? In hyperspace, which is a way of mathematically examining the properties of higher dimensions of space. And that mathematics has now been developed in a very sophisticated way. I'm inclined to think that we can begin to develop, and I'm talking about over the next, let's say, 150, 200 years. So it's a long-term project, but we could begin to develop empirical tests of people, psychonauts, moving through these different supersensible spaces and mapping out the kind of transformations that they experience going from level to level to level, and seeing if those transformations fit the different transformations that we now know about mathematically from the work that's being done on hyperspace mathematics.
Yes, I loved your interview with Bernard Carr, who, the British scientist who is a very respected physicist who's done a lot of that work. I agree with you. I think the hyperspatial models are probably one of the best directions to head in to start kind of assessing and quantifying these deep realities. And do you think, other than the hyperspatial models, are there other kind of aspects, models, mathematics that people have brought to the fore that you think might contribute to this, or you really think the hyperspatial models are the only show in town?
Well, there are, to my knowledge, at least half a dozen, probably a dozen different versions of the hyperspace mathematics that could be applied to consciousness. And so at least I would say for the next decade or two, it's a question of beginning to sort out from amongst these choices. And Bernard Carr has a very well-developed approach himself, but his approach still needs more work.
Well,
I think that, but besides the mathematical dimension of all of this, when we're talking about consciousness, there's the whole question of higher states of consciousness and what they mean. If you go into the study of Buddhism or yoga, they have dozens and dozens of terms for different higher states of consciousness and how those states relate to levels in what they sometimes call the astral plane or the mental plane or the causal plane. There are people I've interviewed today who are have spent their lives, exploring these things, and they all work within a particular framework. It could be a religious framework or some sort of esoteric framework that they're involved in. But the tricky thing is, how do you sort out the social and linguistic biases that each of these psychonauts have when they discuss these things? So often it seems as if we develop a mindset and then everything we see fits our mindset. So when we're exploring the supersensible realms of inner space, the tricky part of it will be to somehow move beyond the individual mindsets that we all have.
Well, that's a very good point. And I must say, in my own journey of having an NDE back in 2008, within a year or two, I certainly realized that the only way to start making any sense of my experience was to myself explore consciousness. You know, you can read about it, you can get other people's ideas, watch DVDs, etc. But really going within was an absolute essential. I was wondering, do you have a personal practice of meditation that you pursue to explore consciousness?
Well, over the years, I've tried many, many approaches. And lately, I do. I meditated about an hour this morning, for example. And I love meditation. I don't follow any single school or discipline. I just sit and let it all happen. I don't think I'm necessarily highly skilled in that department.
Mm-hmm.
Well, except, you said you had that dream when you were younger that really inspired you to do all of this. And then you mentioned another dream. Do you have these experiences maybe in your dream space more often?
Well, if I look back, I could say this. I have had an enormous number of spontaneous psychic experiences through dreams, through synchronicities. They happen on a regular basis, but I don't feel like I can control it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they just happen. Now, they probably happen to more of us than we realize, but because you stay open to really thinking these things have something to it, I'm sure that has a lot to do with why you experience them, because you have this open mind, yes?
Well, yeah, sure. I was interested in mysticism even long before 1973. In
Ah.
1969, when I was still an undergraduate, I wrote a senior honors thesis on the psychology of religious mysticism. That it was sort of a turnaround for me, because when I started it, I figured there is some form of psychopathology that leads people to imagine or hallucinate that they're seeing ghosts and spirits. And I'll write my paper on that. But as I began researching the literature, I came across people like Abraham Maslow, who said, the most highly functioning people in society are having mystical experiences, and those mystical experiences are central to their careers and their identity.
Absolutely. Well, I think you were gifted early on with that first vision, about your uncle, and I would say that is a very important step, because it gives us a trust in the universe. When you have an epiphany like that, even a fairly minor one, can really open the door to where we start to trust the universe more. And I would say that's been my process over the last many years. Do you feel, especially given your history of interviewing so many people in this space, do you glean that we can really trust the universe, that in fact it seems to be guiding us in this direction, or do you think it's all random?
No, I don't think it's random. And in fact, when I tell people, for example, the second dream that I described to you came after months of agony, months of focusing on how am I going to make this shift out of criminology into the study of higher consciousness. And then I had the dream. And I think there's a process there where you tense up, you develop a strong focus, you experience your pain. And when you really want to change, the way I tell people these days, if you resolve to become the best version of yourself, the universe will reach out to help you.
Yeah, one way I put that is when you want to change something in the external outer world, the way to do that is through your inner world, by finding that alignment with your expanded or higher self, that other energy we don't always have access to. When we can align with that, exactly what you said, the outer world seems to just take care of itself. But now I'm wondering, we're friends with and have had many conversations with, in particular, Raymond Moody and Bruce Grayson. They've both been on this program. both of them and others in this field, especially the academics, they study it, they have a lot of respect for it, but many times they can't go all the way to saying, yes, the soul survives the death of the physical body. And yet it seems like when you study this, you've just got to come to some kind of conclusion. And I'm curious if you're also maybe still holding out that maybe not survival, or are you fully on board with that kind of idea, even if we don't know how it all works?
Well, I think people like Bruce Grayson are constrained by their academic circumstances and the culture of academia. Raymond Moody as well. In a way, I was fortunate because after I got my doctoral diploma in parapsychology, well, what happened? I had a mentor, Arthur Young, who was an inventor. He invented the helicopter and became an astrologer. So the day I got my the approval of my dissertation from my faculty, I went to visit him, and he pulled out his ephemeris, and he's looking at what's the significance of this day in my life. And he began asking me about events in the past and said, how long were you in this program? And at that date, it was 6 years. And he said to me, well, it's going to take you another 6 years to undo all the damage the university has done to you. So, and it did. I had to file a libel suit. The skeptics were horrified that a university would offer a degree in parapsychology, and they did everything they could to get the university to revoke my degree.
Oh my gosh.
And so there was a big legal battle. It made me pretty much unemployable within any mainstream academic context, which, as I think back about it, was an advantage for me. I have much less hesitancy about saying that as far as I'm concerned, the evidence for postmortem survival is overwhelming.
Yeah, it really is. I don't know why people... What strikes me so much is that when people, academics or science-minded people, when they tackle this issue, they want it to fit in the materialist model. They want a materialist explanation for how it all works. And where are you on that front? You were focused on the hyperspace theory. Where are you on that front?
Well, I've done many interviews with Bernardo Kastrup, and I admire his philosophy. I think it's very rigorous. The idealist position in philosophy is that the entire universe is mental in nature. Everything that we experience is a thought and is experienced through thought. And the position was first articulated by Bishop Berkeley, for whom the city of Berkeley, California, was named, incidentally.
How about
I
that?
didn't know that.
Yeah, he was, I guess, 18th century or 17th century philosopher who he was an empiricist, but he pointed out all of our empirical knowledge, if you look at it most directly, comes through consciousness. Without consciousness, we have no knowledge of the external world. So the very idea, the postulate that there is such a thing as non-conscious matter is what you would have to say it's an unnecessary assumption. And if you follow the very ancient philosophical system of parsimony, or otherwise known as Occam's razor, you realize you don't need that postulate. All the science that we do, all of our understanding of brain function, and surely you realize that, is perfectly explainable from an idealistic position in metaphysics. So I favor that. But at the same time, I realize if you're a dualist, if you're a materialist, if you're a panpsychist or a dual aspect monist, all of those views can still accommodate survival of postmortem survival, given that you accept hyperspace mathematics.
Right. Well, you bring up some fascinating points here. I mean, one being, of course, the sad aspect that our university academic community, that's where all our young minds are being trained to come into this world and to think. And it's being drilled out of them that these kind of options, this nature of reality is even there. Because of the academic institutions and how they're kind of self-confining and constrained into this very limited and actually disproven scientific view of reality. Because idealism, as Bernardo points out, and this is something we agree with completely in Living in a Mindful Universe and in all of our talks, is fundamentally mental. And in fact, there are many reasons why panpsychism I would view as just a very kind of corrupt materialist position that doesn't really give you any ground at all, except to admit that all the evidence for, non-local consciousness and primacy of mind is real. But that's why I love Bernardo's metaphysics, and I think he's absolutely right on target about all of this. And it's a shame that kind of thing is being held from the young minds in academia today because they believe materialism contains the answers. So it's really kind of a tragedy that we're in this situation. Are you seeing, would you say, in this many decade career of interviews, are you seeing some progress in terms of the overall thinking here? Do you think academia is ready to kind of crack under the weight of evidence, or where are we headed in the near term?
Well, I think we have to be patient. I think, as I say, a horizon of maybe 100, 200 years is important. These are deep changes. They're going to permeate the culture very slowly, but it does seem to me that we're on the cusp, that we are turning the corner. It's one of the reasons that I do all of these YouTube videos, and we're having an impact. We reach on YouTube now anywhere between 5,000 and 12,000 people a day with this message. So,
and you didn't get on YouTube until much more recently, correct?
Well, that's right. I was on public television between 1986 and 2002, and actually we had a much larger audience then. So it's slow. Every interview like this one that we're having right now is a drop in the bucket, but over time it has an impact.
And also there's that theory of the tipping point, that sometimes change seems to be gradual, incremental, but at some point it's just like suddenly it's changed and everyone is like, wait, isn't this how it's always been? I feel like that might have some potential for us. At least I hope it's not 150 years.
Well, I hope so too, but in my experience, there have been many backlashes. And just when you think you're making a lot of progress, then the other side has its inning. And
yeah, I remember Bruce Grayson, back when he understood about these near-death experiences way back in the 70s, he thought, oh my gosh, we're going to change the world and everyone's going to realize and it's all going to help everyone. And then he slowly realized, it's not going to happen quite that way. And he became, I like how you say patience rather than frustration, but, right? Because what kind of way is that to hold your energy? But patience. Yeah, and Bruce has a whole different kind of more grounded energy about it all now. And he's really done so much. And as have you and all the other researchers. Because you're so involved in your media work, do you do your own original research ever?
Well, I did original research largely between 1976 and 1987, when I did a long-term field study with a fellow named Ted Owens, who is the subject of my book, The PK Man. He was quite unusual. He believed himself to have been a UFO abductee, that they operated on his brain and gave him psychic powers greater than anybody since the days of Moses. And he did hundreds of demonstrations to prove this. He wanted nothing more than to interest scientists. But very few people were interested. I was largely a graduate student when I first met him, and I actually had one of my faculty members resign from my committee because I took on this research project.
Wow.
Wow.
Wow, that's rough. You really made it through a tough. You really hung in there, is what I'm saying. And you seem to, maybe it was that hippie attitude, Berkeley kind of attitude, but you didn't let the man get you down, right? You just kept going. It's amazing.
Well, I think I had an entrepreneurial spirit. My father was a small businessman, and I figured that I'm going to do what I want to do in life. I'm not going to let other people tell me. Almost never in my entire life have I had a boss I had to be accountable to. So
That's the way to
that's
go.
good.
Yeah.
Well, I would say that one of the gifts to you from the universe was those early experiences in the form of the dream and the vision,
yeah.
because you've had your own experience. You know there's more to this world, and I would suggest trying to be a little more optimistic about the time scale of all this. That there are a lot of people out there having their own experiences every day. And they start kind of lining up. And the more that you do your work and other people who are getting this out to the world, I think it tends to collect all of those natural epiphanies that are happening out there. And sooner or later, it just gets to a point where the broad population has enough experience in this, they don't really care what the academic and scientific communities say. And that's, I think, the inflection point that I believe we're headed to a lot more quickly than 50 or 100 years from now. I think we're getting very close.
Eben always says 10 years from now.
Well,
10
I started
years.
saying that in 2018. So the claim is that by 2028, no respectable, well-read, scientifically minded intellectual person on Earth will doubt the reality of the afterlife. And as you've said already, the evidence is overwhelming. And that's the thing. We just have to get the evidence out to the world in a fashion that fits this kind of clickbait, short attention span audience that we have out there. But thank God for free YouTube videos to help bring this world along.
And there are many academics under the radar who are just ready to come forth with all of this. And right?
Although some of them seem to be waiting till they retire, which is sad.
Yes.
Like Bruce Grayson, he's really going public now with this book after retiring from official practice. I find that sad that it has to be retirement.
Others too, yeah.
But
Well, I remember back in the 1970s when the remote viewing research was very strong, when Uri Geller made a huge media splash. I sponsored Uri Geller's appearances at Berkeley in those days. And I thought everything was going to be revolution at that point. The consciousness revolution of the 1970s. It was a very exciting decade. And I had an interaction with Jacques Vallée, the UFO researcher who was also a computer scientist. He helped develop the internet. He was working with the ARPANET in those early days. And he said he remembers being involved in the remote viewing research, being involved in the birth of the internet. He said they both had revolutionary potential. But now looking back, we can see, well, the internet really, I would say, attained that potential. The research in parapsychology has yet to do so. So it's anybody's guess how quick it would happen.
right. Well, I think Thomas Kuhn wrote about kind of the advances in scientific paradigms and the death of old paradigms. And, he talked about the weight of evidence and how ultimately it finally does end. I would like to say that the truth bends towards a kind of truth and justice. And in many ways, this truth of the eternity of consciousness will emerge because the data and the rational argument is all coming together.
But putting a specific date on it kind of reminds me of those people who prophesize the world's going to end on December 12th, right? Or 2012, Y2K, all of that. And the year 2028 could go by, and there you'll be sitting. So it's a rough estimate. Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
I think we just need better kind of driving mechanisms, ways for all people to explore consciousness. Certainly, if everybody got into meditation, that would change this world dramatically over a few years, or even just a better percentage of people into meditation.
Yeah. Well, in my lifetime, that's changed enormously. I remember when almost nobody meditated and almost nobody practiced yoga. Now there are yoga studios, dozens of them here in Albuquerque where I live, and most cities have dozens of yoga studios. So things are changing. And I do think there was a very important milestone with regard to the academic community in 2018, when the American Psychologist, which is the flagship journal of the American Psychological Association, published an article by Etzel Cardania in which he summarized meta-analyses covering some 1,400 experiments in parapsychology, showing that they were overwhelmingly statistically significant, and that the statistical significance did not drop at all when the experiments became more tightly controlled and rigorous. And the American Psychological Association has been one of the more hostile organizations. So for them to publish this article, I think is very important. And it sort of puts a marker out for anybody in the academic community who says, you know, this field is all bosh. There it is in a very respected journal in great detail. Unfortunately, I don't think the article gets read by more than a few thousand people at most. So it takes a while for that information to seep into the culture.
Well, I think you're right. Etzel's done some beautiful work. That particular paper was definitely a milestone. I would also point out there are other scientific groups that have put out various manifestos, like the Galileo Commission is the one that comes to mind most prominently. With the recent interview with David Lorimer, and of course Harold Wallach wrote that. But GalileoCommission.org is a beautiful resource. There have been other manifestos. I know Mario Beauregard also headed up a particular manifesto for the scientific community. So
and that's all in recent years.
In very recent years,
so maybe
the last
it's
decade.
Starting to converge.
I think it is absolutely starting to shift, and it gets to the point where it's only by willful ignorance that a scientific intellectual mind says this stuff is impossible. You know, if you ignore the data, how can you judge it? And yet the people who criticize it the most really are not familiar with it. I would say that's one of the biggest problems.
Well, I do think that one event that's going on right now that I'm involved with, I am guessing that you probably are too, is the Bigelow Institute competition. And they're giving away $1.5 million of prize money for the best essays on survival after death. And I'm sure it's going to be highly publicized and will represent a very big push in the community. So for all the entrants, win or lose, I think everybody will win.
Have you entered? Are you going to write a paper?
Oh, I am entered, yes.
And we are going to write a co-paper. So
we're doing it together. But I think you're exactly right, and I'm so pleased that Robert Bigelow has taken this action. I mean, that's a very good use of $1 million as opposed to James Randi's false claims of giving $1 million to anybody who could prove basically paranormal activity, but he never intended to give it to anybody, no matter what. So I think this is a great use of this money, and I agree with you. I think it will be widely publicized.
And hopefully some really slamming essays.
I'm sure that'll happen.
I think collectively, we're restricted to 25,000 words. And so many of you academics like to write, 10 times that to get your point across. So it's a challenge to
get it all tight.
To be very clear. So I think it's great. And I also think that the spirit of competition is more collaboration, because whoever wins, we're all going to win. and bring this message out there. So it's
Yeah, it's going to be a win-win for the world.
Yeah.
Getting this out. So very exciting.
Mhm. And as far as I know, people such as yourself, the best people in the field, are involved in this competition. The Galileo Project people, for example, are, and many of the other people I've interviewed are involved. So the quality of the overall contributions, which I think will all be posted eventually on the internet, is going to be very high.
I think so, and I think they did an excellent job picking their judges. These are very open-minded, very scientific minds, and they will do an excellent job of kind of letting the best bubble to the top. So it's going to be a win-win for the world. So that's $1 million very well spent, from my perspective.
Yeah. And by the end of the year, it'll be all over the news worldwide.
Right. I think November 1st of this year is when they announce the winner. So that'll be a very exciting time. Another question I have for you is, in light of all this incredible work you've done and I think through your interviews, certainly people can appreciate there's a tremendous amount of very important data on these topics of consciousness and the nature of reality that shows this kind of post-materialist view so beautifully. Have you discovered something that would help answer your questions that started it all in terms of your criminology work, in terms of the psychopathology? In other words, a sense of, what purpose do those kind of aberrations of humanity, what do they offer for the growth of the one mind, I would say?
It's very interesting. I kind of think that, let me step back and say this. I've come to a point in my life where I embrace the whole. I feel like I've had a taste of cosmic consciousness, and cosmic consciousness means oneness with the ground of being, with everything in manifestation. And that means criminal activity, it means psychopathological activity, it means the very things that when I'm in my normal day-to-day life I despise, I realize I'm also one with. And so when it comes to psychopathology, for example, there is unfortunately, there's a lot of data amongst, let's say, mediums and people who report a lot of spontaneous psychic experiences often have had childhood trauma. And I think what childhood trauma does is it pushes people, if the external world is not safe for them, they go inside of themselves. Now, a lot of psychological theorists say they develop fantasies, and that may be true to an extent, but I think they also push into the psychic world. They push into the world of spirit, and they open up to these things. At the same time, they're damaged emotionally. And I think that's one of the factors that has slowed down recognition of this field, because many of the claimants, because they are sometimes recognizably emotionally damaged, lose credibility.
It's my understanding of really many people that we've encountered who have these kind of extra sensory abilities, very natural. I agree, they very often have this childhood trauma, and how they've explained it to me is, for example, while they're being sexually or physically abused, they leave their body.
They dissociate.
They have an out-of-body experience and go somewhere else, and they don't even realize they're doing it. And then later, they just think it's a natural part of a coping mechanism. But much later, they seem to, as you say, have these natural abilities, but then they need to learn how to manage them more. So it's, do we really want to go through such trauma to have these abilities? That's the big question. I don't know that everyone does. Laura Lynn Jackson, for example, she's a natural medium who I don't believe had a childhood trauma. So it's not 100%.
She did, in a sense of feeling she was responsible for her grandfather's death.
Yes, but she wasn't.
Oh, I know. Okay, I see what you mean.
Sexually or physically abused or neglected.
Right. It just emphasizes how much more this world could change for the better if we really had much better support for children, got rid of childhood poverty, in one generation, we could have a tremendous beneficial impact on this world. And I love what you said in that answer about becoming a believer in the whole, in the all, because I've come to realize, and part of where I was going with that question was just a sense that, it's the shadow sides, it's everything, the good and the bad, the dark and the light, all of them add together that provide this dynamic of growth for that one mind. And I believe it's all essential. But of course, from my point of view, ultimately, based on my NDE experience, it's all about that love. And I would wonder I guess we're getting close to the end here, but I was wondering if you could comment a bit on how all of this research and understanding over these many decades has influenced your spiritual or religious beliefs and kind of your notion of that bigger picture of
not necessarily religious beliefs, but your
spiritual
worldview,
belief.
your overall worldview.
Yes, overall worldview.
Yeah.
We'll put it that way.
Well, you mentioned love, and of course, love is part of my name. When I was a kid, people teased me about it. They'd say, "Oh, mishmash," or something like that. But I've come to appreciate that was a gift, being given a name like Mishlove, because if you think about it, it sort of means, loving everything. It's all one big Mishlove.
That's great. I love it. That's plenty of religion for me right there.
There you go.
So yeah, I think over the years I've just come to appreciate, things that when I was much younger I thought were detriments in my life have become blessings.
Well, I think that's a beautiful way of putting it. When we come to realize that the hardships and the challenges in life in many ways are the deepest blessings. They're kind of the milestones that mark our way forward. So I'm so glad to hear you put it that way. Very, very.
And the idea of embracing the all is really, there's a paradox there, because, here we are, as Alan once put it, skin encapsulated egos on the one hand. Right. And on the other hand, we're one with the cosmic mind. We're one with everything. And how to balance those two realities is sometimes very tricky for people. That's where I think the world of mythology comes in, the world of images and symbols. It connects us as individual egos to the larger reality of which we are manifestations of.
Yeah, you're touching on something that I sometimes say is the new duality is being aware of ourselves as individuals, but also connected to that oneness at the same time. So we can be getting around in the world, but still have that awareness, and we can sort of switch between the larger awareness and our walking around. There are people on Earth now who can do that. And I think that phrase, the new duality, is not quite technically correct, but it's just a fun way to bring up that we can have the awareness of both. We don't need to pick one or the other.
Right.
Yeah. Well, when we talk about the afterlife, it sort of creates a conflict, because on the one hand, yes, other discarnate spirits exist and there is an afterlife, and on the other hand, it's all us.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Well, especially when you get into not only the afterlife literature, but of course that voluminous reincarnation literature. For example, out of University of Virginia, you start to realize this notion of the one mind and of eternity of soul is perfectly compatible with the evidence. And so let's jump in full speed ahead and enjoy that, study it, learn how it works, learn how to more peacefully coexist with that beautiful deep truth of the universe. And that's where I think this world is headed. That's why I can be optimistic. And a lot of that optimism comes from work like your work. So I want to thank you, Jeff, for what you do for this world, what you've been doing for 50 years now.
And for joining us today.
And for joining us today, too, to help share it with our audience. But I think when historians look back on this era of what I see as kind of a radical revolution, I think they'll look at people like you and talk about what a catalyst you were to help bring this world to the
The
next level.
true pioneer
Yeah,
of
a true pioneer.
parapsychology,
So
for
thank
sure.
you for all of your work over these many decades. And you've got a beautiful on-air presence, a very active inner child, which to me is something that is a very kind of respectable place to be in. It demonstrates a spiritual maturity and a kind of a deep intellectual understanding. Seeing the irony and the pathos and the humor in it all, and running ahead. So thank you for all of your work, and thank you for being with us today.
Thank you.
It's been a joy to be with you, and I look forward to having you back on New Thinking Aloud.
We will do that for sure. Jeff, thank you
Yes,
so
thank you
much.
so
You have a
much.
great evening, and our best to your family. We love meeting them too.
Yes.
All right.
Okay. So now we will go to the meditation part of our webinar. And I will say, I've been enjoying reading all of your comments in the chat screen. You all have been joining the discussion with some really interesting thoughts, and it's really great to see that, because it makes us feel like we're in conversation with you. And we can't always address questions that come up there, but we love to see what's going on in your mind as we're having this talk, just so we know if we're on the beam. And it seems we are, because
resonating.
You all have really shared some wonderful, wonderful thoughts. And Eben and I, we like to read through them afterwards. So
Right.
yeah,
We'll
feel
spend a lot
free.
of time. So thanks
Feel
for
free.
communicating.
But at any rate, so now we can take a moment for our connection that we've missed all this entire year of having to stay home for the most part, except for essential sorts of activities. This has given us that opportunity to connect with each other, not in person, but spiritually, mentally, non-materially, and we can do that together through this meditation. So I invite you now to bring your attention to this moment, here and now, calm and relaxed. Become aware of your breath as it moves in and out. Now, move your awareness to your heart center and generate a feeling of gratitude, trust, and allowing. Now, imagine your breath is moving in and out of your heart. As you exhale, imagine your breath is filling up a bubble surrounding your entire body. As you inhale, imagine your breath is coming from all points of this bubble back into your heart. Continue breathing this way. Now, from your heart center, move your awareness to below your body, down, down, all the way into the center of the earth. Feel your strong and stable connection to the earth. As you continue to breathe, imagine your exhale is filling up the entire earth. Imagine your inhale is coming back to you from all points of the earth. Continue breathing this way. Now, move your awareness from the center of the earth back into your body and into the heart. Using your breath, feel your heart expand to encompass all souls in your surrounding area, all souls in your entire town, all souls in your entire country, all souls from around the globe in challenging situations or feeling just fine. No soul left behind. We are all in this together. Truly. Feel your heart expand to encompass the united souls of Earth and beyond. Now, return from your experience and remember who you truly are, a spiritual being living a spiritual purpose. Remember
you are deeply loved and cherished forever. You have nothing to fear. You are cared for.
Yes. Yes, you are. So, anytime you want to do this kind of spherical breath, breathing in and out of your heart into this bubble around your body and expanding it as large as you can, this is a beautiful way to kind of ground your energy and really feel it kind of expand, and then it naturally connects to others around you. The heart math research tells us that you don't even have to say a word, that as you do this, we have that routine at 11 a.m. love, no matter your time zone, at 11 a.m. Feel this love, feel this energy going out to the world, radiating. And if you're one of those people in a challenging situation, that's your opportunity to receive that love. And this wave of love going around the planet can really support us all, whether those people who are having such challenges realize it or not. Us sending that love into the world will make a difference. Subtle or not, it will make a difference. So thank you all for participating in those meditations. Thank you for joining us in this webinar. In 2 weeks, we have Gary Zukoff and Linda Francis scheduled. Gary is the author of The Dancing Wu-Li Masters, way back in 1979 or 80. Yeah. And then The Seed of the Soul, about 10 years later, he wrote that. And he's written several other books since then. He's got a new book coming out. So we will be in conversation with him in 2 weeks, and we hope to see you there. Until then,
namaste.
Namaste. And thanks for all you do in the world to spread this energy and message to all.